Welcome to Ohio Roots, the official podcast of the Ohio Genealogical Society. Join us as we embark on a captivating journey through Ohio's rich genealogy, history, and abundant resources. Hosted by me, OGS Executive Director Noel Poirier, this podcast brings you insightful conversations with a diverse array of guests, from OGS members, chapter leaders, and staff to renowned genealogists, historians, and influential figures within the genealogical community. Each episode delves into fascinating topics and captivating stories. So grab your headphones, hit that play button, and join us on this enthralling journey of Ohio's roots. Today's guest is Drew Smith, a longtime leader in the genealogy world with a passion for combining family history and technology. Drew is an associate librarian emeritus from the University of South Florida, a respected author of several genealogy books, including his latest book, Generation by Generation, and he's co-host of the Genealogy Guys Podcast. He's been teaching, writing, and speaking about genealogy for decades and has played a key role in building online communities for researchers around the globe. I'm just thrilled to welcome Drew to the Ohio Roots Podcast as he shares his journey and his insights from a lifetime of genealogical exploration. I hope you enjoy this chat with Drew Smith. Well, I'd really like to welcome Drew Smith to the Ohio Roots Podcast here for us. It's so nice to finally get a chance to talk to you. I've had a number of people in my ears saying I need to talk to you, so I'm pleased that you're able to take some time today to be with me.
I'm glad to be here, and it's always fun to work with OGS in different roles, and so thank you for inviting me.
Oh, no, it's our pleasure, believe me. Now, you've probably told this story 100 times because I've read your bios and I've seen some of your presentations, but I ask it of every guest we have. How did you get your start? What kind of lit the fire for you in doing genealogy?
Well, yeah, I mean, as I said, I grew up in South Carolina, upstate South Carolina, and a lot of, we tease a lot, I think, about this, but one of the questions you get when you meet new people maybe is they ask you, who are your people? They want to know where you came from and how you kind of fit into the community. And so I was kind of used to hearing that. And certainly I was around my relatives on my mother's side. She was from South Carolina. So I would hear them and meet aunts and uncles and cousins and so forth. But as far as my own family, it was something I was curious about, but didn't know how or what to do about it. Part of the problem was my father's family were all from New Jersey, so I didn't have really easy access to records or anything, and really didn't know what to do. And but I knew that I wanted to do something. And so when my favorite aunt passed away in 1992, and I went to the funeral, and I got to see all these people I hadn't seen in a few years, again, cousins and other relatives, I thought, oh my gosh, that generation of my aunt is almost entirely gone, except for my mother, maybe one of her sisters, my father and his brother. There's almost nobody left. And I thought, if I'm going to get serious about this and find out about both my mother's and my father's family, I need to start working on it. And by this time, I worked for IT for a number of years. I was very familiar with technology, with computers. I helped faculty and students at large research universities use computer systems. I was around when the internet came into existence, and I was helping people with these kinds of things. And I was very familiar with the fact that there were resources online for genealogy. There were mailing lists, there were websites or things preceding websites, but places where you could get data. And so I was able to use my computer skills, my internet skills, to get started on this and find software that I could install and talk to people who were, by this time I was living in Florida, but I was able to talk to people both in South Carolina and people who had access to New Jersey records and find out a lot about my family.
You know, it's interesting you bring up the early years of the internet, and I know that was some period you were very active early on with AOL's genealogy forum. And talk to me a little bit about what that landscape was like back then for people doing genealogy.
Sure. So the first thing was that I was stunned when I got onto mailing lists. And of course, I was on mailing lists that had nothing to do with genealogy because of my job at a university. I was stunned by the fact that you could post a message and get back a response from anywhere in the world within a matter of a minute or two. I mean, this was so unheard of, and your messages went out to, you didn't know who, because you didn't know
Hmm.
who all the people were you were communicating with. You just knew that maybe it was like as I said, a message in a bottle. You're throwing it out there and somebody is hopefully will respond. So the internet, as it developed, and yeah, AOL, America Online, was one of the first consumer tools that allowed you access to the internet. Prior to that, in order to get to the internet, you pretty much had to be either affiliated with a university that was on the network, or maybe a
Hmm.
major corporation like
Okay.
IBM or AT&T or somebody. But the nice thing was when America Online got connected, now the people that were already in the internet thought that was a disaster, because suddenly there were all these people, tens and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, who didn't have the computer background of universities or big companies. And so they didn't understand the culture. And that was sort of the
Hmm.
first thing about the early days of the internet, was how do you bring in all these people like America Online, like CompuServe, like Prodigy, Delphi, Genie, Genie, which was part of GE. How do you incorporate these people into the existing internet culture? Well, certainly the culture had to change, but it was
Right.
very much an educational thing. So I was ahead of the curve because I had already been on the internet, having been at a university that was on it. But at the same time, on America Online, I was able to help people. And I discovered once in 1992 that I'd been on America Online since like 1989. I found there was a genealogy forum, a
Hmm.
place where people interested could go. And we would have one or two chats, live chats a week.
Okay.
That's as busy as it was. Now, of course, eventually that developed. AOL grew enormously from 1992 into the mid 90s and so on. And so we ended up having chats every day, and then multiple chats every day, and chats that were dedicated to particular ethnicities, particular parts of the United States, like the South, you name it. And so as a result, you could go on and you could find people who were researching in the same places. They could give
Hmm.
you tips. You could give them tips. And I became a volunteer within about a year, which was nice because I think it gave me free America Online, which was a little pricey. I was out in the kind of boonies at the time, and as a result, some of my call in was a little pricey. This was before I moved to Tampa. And so it was nice to have a little bit of reduction in the cost of my internet access. But I got to meet so many great genealogists who
Right.
were involved, and some of the people you've heard of, people like Dear Myrtle
Hmm.
and people like that who were already on America Online using it. And I got to meet other people too, and some who went to OGS conferences later,
Hmm.
speakers, and so forth. So it was a great introduction to the genealogy community, particularly the more techie genealogy community,
Right.
people that were more comfortable being online. And not
Right.
everybody was and ever was comfortable with being
Right.
online. So,
How do you view kind of the proliferation today that we have of genealogical resources online? And you talk about those early folks had knowledge already coming into it,
yeah,
whereas a lot of the folks who go online today to do genealogy have no idea what they're doing.
they
So,
don't.
so let's talk about the landscape today versus then.
Well, you're right. Partially, it's easier to be online
Mhm.
today than it was then. There was a lot you almost had to know, and you had to install software, and you had to do a lot of things,
Yeah.
which is not the big deal now, because once
Mhm.
the World Wide Web came along and websites came along, like the big ones like Family Search and Ancestry, and eventually Find My Past and My Heritage.
Mhm.
Um, these sites made it, that was their goal, was to make it as easy as possible to
Right.
get online and do things. So as long as you had a browser, you were good. You didn't even have to install software. And so today it's easy. The problem is that people don't have that experience, and they may not even have gone to a local genealogy society. That was
Right.
important back in the 90s. I discovered my city had a genealogy society. I could go to meetings, talk to people, learn from them.
Mhm.
And a lot of the folks today, I think, have gotten into genealogy without any exposure to um, societies and
Right.
so forth. And as a result, they're just not sure what to expect. And then, they think it's all going to be easy. And they also have this unfortunate misconception that everything's online. I mean,
Right.
again,
Right.
and maybe it's sort of a side effect of the advertising of the big companies
Yeah.
that, oh, we're going to, give you the world and it's all online and you'll never have to visit a cemetery or a courthouse or a library or an archive. You can just do it all from home with at 2 o'clock in the morning when in your bunny slippers.
Hmm.
And that's not it, but I think that's one of the things we deal with
Right.
today that we didn't deal with so much um 30 years ago.
Right.
Because 30 years ago, I mean, again, things were very different. And I
Right.
think people had a stronger sense that, yes, you're going to have to do some traveling to go to repositories to do real good research. You may have to
Right.
write physical letters, you may have to make physical phone calls, and not this idea of, oh, I can just touch a few buttons on my computer and it'll all be there and I
Right.
don't have to do any more work. So,
Yeah.
it has changed.
Kind of building on that. I mean, I think it was your first book. Might have been an early book, Social Networking for Genealogists.
Yes.
Um, Talk a little bit about how the development of social media, and particularly the big ones, have impacted on genealogy and positively and negatively, I guess.
Sure. And I think the two biggest that have continued over the last, again, yeah, you're right. That book came out about 2009, I
Hmm.
think. And I was trying to introduce the audience who were already genealogists who didn't know about
Hmm.
things like Facebook. And in fact, Twitter was so new in 2009, I didn't even mention it. I wasn't, yeah, no, yeah, I know. It's kind of come and gone since then in its own ways. So it's probably worked out for the better. But Facebook and YouTube, and there were other sites for photos and sites for, mailing lists and message boards, which have become a lot less important, partially because people have gone to things like Facebook and they've gone
Hmm.
to things like YouTube. And those have had an enormous impact on genealogy. Facebook, in terms of bringing those people together that don't go to their local genealogy societies. But that's kind of nice because some people, well, first of all, it's physically difficult for them to go to
Hmm.
local society meetings. Maybe they're at an age where they're not comfortable driving, or they, going downtown in some cities are really difficult to find parking. And so it's gotten to the point where Facebook, and certainly during the pandemic where people could not go anywhere, um, that Facebook became the place where you could talk to other genealogists, you could learn from them, you could ask
Hmm.
questions. So that has been an enormous change over the
Sure.
last 20 to 30 years is Facebook. The other one is YouTube, because again, from an educational standpoint, it's easy for almost anybody to make a YouTube video that can educate, that can share information. And many people, again, who aren't going to local societies or aren't traveling to institutes or conferences, may say, well, I can learn pretty much anything. I just go to YouTube, type in what I want to know
Right.
about, and boom, there's a video that I can watch.
Hmm.
So it's dramatically changed both research, collaboration, let's say, and education in
Hmm.
terms of genealogy. And of course, not in just genealogy, in any field in the world, but as genealogists, you can't do genealogy without collaborating. You've just got to
Right.
work with people. But Facebook has certainly made that a lot easier than it used to be, and YouTube has made education a lot easier than it used to be.
Hi, everyone. Noel Poirier here, Executive Director of the Ohio Genealogical Society and your host for the Ohio Roots Podcast. Did you know you can help preserve the past and empower the future? Your donation to the Ohio Genealogical Society helps protect vital family history records and supports research for generations to come. Visit www.ogs.org/donate and give today. Thank you so much for your support. If you enjoy listening to the Ohio Roots Podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could go to whatever platform it is that you listen and give us a good review. Reviews help us get more listeners and reach more people with Ohio Roots and what we're trying to do with the Ohio Genealogical Society. So please, leave us a nice review, and thanks for listening. Do you think there's a challenge though with how social media has grown, all of its channels and all of its options, to that there's no vetting of the people who are posting the videos or the comments or the information?
No, that's a really great question. I'm even reading a book about how, unfortunately, in the modern world, we have, in some cases, many people are distrustful of
Hmm.
experts, people
Sure.
that are, are doctors, are lawyers, or whoever you name it,
Hmm.
who trained for many years to become experts in their fields. And I think that there's a little bit of that in genealogy too, because as I said, anybody can put out a YouTube video, no matter
Right.
what their qualifications are, even if they've had no official training or education. Anybody can start a Facebook group
Hmm.
and put it out there. And in fact, that was a concern of mine when we created the Genealogy Squad, which is a very large Facebook group. It's got about 70 something thousand members, of which
Mm.
about 45,000 are active, meaning that there's at least that many people who do something in it every month.
Sure.
They post, they like, they do something, they comment. When we were going to create that, this was because we already had a group that Blaine Bettinger and I had created, genetic genealogy tips and techniques. We wanted a place to send people who had non-DNA questions. And the problem was that we looked around and we weren't sure of the quality of the groups that were out there because
Mm.
anybody could have created one. And so
Right.
we decided we would create one. And Cindy Engel joined us as being an admin, and she's still with us, as is Carrie Taplin, and so forth. That we created a group where we felt that we had the qualifications. We were people that were respected in the genealogy community, and therefore we could assure that the good information was being shared. But that is an issue both with places like Facebook and places like YouTube, because unlike the traditional means of disseminating information, think about books. You don't get a book. I mean, people can self-publish, yes, but if you want to get good quality information, you tend to look for publishers that have good track records, university presses, for example, or just major publishers like McGraw-Hill or somebody like that, where you figure it's gone through a lot of editors and editing and people that try to maintain the quality of it, and so forth. And so then, or journals and magazines. Again, you kind of know that, well, that's expensive. Not just anybody puts out a journal or a magazine. It's usually good quality information that's been vetted by a lot of publishers and editors. So it is in the modern world, because anybody can put stuff out there. It falls on the genealogist, in our case, to decide, is this person reputable? Do they know what they're talking about? Or is it possible that they just think they know what they're talking about, but unfortunately they are sharing misinformation or information that's of just low quality?
It kind of gets back to your earlier point, I think, of genealogical organizations and societies. I know we at the Ohio Genealogical Society kind of view ourselves as a resource for anybody looking to do their Ohio genealogy, not so much for the specific information per se, but to guide them to the proper places to get that information and get accurate information. Do you think that's a role that genealogical societies need to embrace?
Oh, I think education is probably the most important role that a genealogical society can embrace. I mean, there's a few roles, but when I was president of our local society in Tampa, and I did it for 9 years because it took me a while to persuade my vice president to run for president. Um, I decided that the money we were spending on some of the things in the society, like newsletters and things, I was thinking people can get that stuff online. They don't need us to be mailing things at the cost of postage. Instead, the one thing we could do with the money that the society had was bring in the best known speakers in the business, the people that were highly respected. And we would do that once a year for our all day seminar, not unlike OGS having a major conference once a year. That's important because you kind of figure when OGS brings in people that they're well known and vetted. They're people that have a, I know that when I propose things to speak at OGS, they say, "What's your lecture experience?" Now I can say, well, I've kind of talked at OGS since 2009, and I've been speaking at other conferences. but you have a better sense of the quality. And I think that's what's both local societies and state societies and national societies are doing, is bringing in quality education. And I think that's almost the most important thing. Now, again, journals can be important, although I think people are finding that, they're getting more of their information that way online. And so sometimes you're going to see more and more, I think, societies only doing digital journals if they do journals. And so I think that that's the role, and there's a social role, but this one has gotten a little trickier, particularly at local societies, because people might say, well, I don't have to leave the house. I can go online and associate with other genealogists. Although I think we both agree there's nothing quite like talking to people in person, to see things and to interact with them. I still enjoy, when it's a topic that really is something I'm curious about, I do go to my local society, or several, because we have a couple in the area here in Tampa. That's kind of the thing about being in Florida. You have so many retirees, you have a lot of people doing genealogy, and there's a lot of societies. So, and I know that from speaking too, because I've spoken at dozens of the local societies in Florida. In fact, as you know, Florida is one of the places that has a chapter of OGS. And so
I was going to mention it, so I'm glad you did.
Yeah, I mean, that just tells you that Florida's got a lot of researchers, a lot of genealogists, probably more than most states do. And partially because it's a place that people have traditionally retired to over the last 40 or 50 years. So, as I said, going to these meetings, I like it, again, when I can. That's the other thing. Although I will put this message out to all the societies out there. If you're still meeting during the week, during the workday, you're probably not helping yourself, because a lot of people can't get away from their 9 to 5 Monday through Friday jobs to get to your society meetings. Now, I know they don't want to do evenings because people don't want to drive at night. I get that. But again, there's always Saturdays. And I think if it's important enough, people will give up their other Saturday activities to go to a society meeting, depending on when you hold it. So.
Let's talk a little bit about kind of generational things, because I'm of a particular generation that isn't. We're not known as a generation of joiners.
Yeah.
We grew up with the internet. We grew up with all those things, and so the idea of going to a meeting somewhere and socializing with people isn't terribly appealing to a lot of people in my particular generation. And then as the younger generations are coming into it and into genealogy, what do we have to do as an organization, not just OGS, but any genealogical organization, in your opinion, to kind of attract those people? I think you mentioned a great point, which was meeting times for chapters. But what are some other ideas you think there are?
Sure. And this is, there isn't a society that I'm talking to at any level, particularly local societies everywhere. Some are shutting down because they can't attract new members. The existing members are getting to an age where they can't deal with it any longer. By the way, there was a book that came out a few decades ago. Maybe you remember. I remember the title was like Bowling Alone, and it talked about how people weren't joining leagues anymore. They just went and bowled on their own. And I think that's where we're finding ourselves, is this commitment of time, and not just attending meetings, but also being sucked into being a volunteer and so forth. Because that if you go and I was just at a meeting of one of my local societies, and there was somebody there who had never been there before, and they were slightly younger. They weren't like 20s somethings, but they were younger. And everybody kind of looked at them like, oh, fresh blood. And there's someone who can, not only just attend, but maybe they can volunteer and do stuff. And I think, it's how does the younger generation look at all that? I don't, it'd be interesting to look into things like, I'm sure there's been research done on, are kids still joining clubs in high schools? I don't know. I was a member of a gazillion clubs of some kind, I think, in high school. College, the same thing. Somebody's joining sororities and fraternities and doing these things. So the question becomes, what can you do? And it means you have to think outside the box. You have to go to places where you can attract people. The Jewish Society here in Tampa, and St. Petersburg and Clearwater, they've even gone to when the county has a Jewish food festival, they would have a table there. and to try to attract people. They figure, oh, so I think you have to really think of all the places where a potential member might show up. But I think it's going to take a little deep digging into the psychology, and I haven't had that opportunity myself since haven't been a president for a while. I probably would be reading this stuff if I were, and see what's the psychology say of why people of a certain age in their 20s and 30s and 40s, why do they join clubs? What is it they're looking for? And can a local society offer it? And I don't have the answer because I haven't done that deep diving, but I know there have been presentations at conferences on how to attract members. Some of it has to do with, of course, your online presence. If you're not online, you've got a serious problem if you don't have a website. And I know of societies that took a long time to get a decent website and are still a little, and partially because of the age of the group and their technical abilities, have not been able to maintain an up-to-date website. You go to a website and you realize that the page hasn't been updated in a year and there's no events listed. I'm sorry, but the perception is going to be, this is not an active society. Why would I ever want to attend their meetings? And so you've got to focus on your presence, because guess what? That is your first exposure. That is where people will first see you. And if you don't have a really good, up-to-date, nicely designed page, we used to joke, Cindy England and I used to do presentations on societies on how to design a good website. We said, you do not need the little dog running across the screen, the animated dog to show that you have mail or something. I mean, there was all these little gifs of, things. And we said, no, don't do that. Another one, I'm going to throw in one more before we move on, but I was going to say, if you put your thing out there, your website, and it says Washington County Genealogical Society, and you never state what state you're in, it's like, excuse me, it's like, do you realize how many Washington counties there are in the United States, or whatever else it might be? That's a common one. You've really got to have a good design, and because that, again, is first impressions. First impressions are so critical. Then you are going to have to suck in people with, again, not just a page that shows nothing but text. People want to see pictures of people. We are, as human beings, we are attracted to pictures of people. That's just a social thing built into our DNA. And as a result, unless you show people, and nothing too stilted. I mean, people having fun, they're smiling, they're laughing, they're doing things. Maybe they're out cleaning cemeteries. Maybe they're out, doing a potluck. Maybe there's something that looks like it's a lot of fun. And if you don't have pictures of those on the main page, you're not going to keep people's interest. They don't want to just see a boring page.
Talk to me about the Genealogy Guys podcast, because podcasting was fairly new, if not very, very new, if not starting out right away when Genealogy Guys kind of started. So talk to me about how that idea came about and just how it's grown over the years.
Sure. So yeah, that was in 2005. We're coming up on our 20th anniversary. And you're right. Podcasting was so new that our hosting service, Libsyn, Liberated Syndication, called Libsyn, had only been in business for 10 months. And the reason that it came about for us was as I was teaching full time. At that time, I was in the school of what's now called the School of Information. It was you and I would call it the library school, but it does more than that these days. But it was the school for graduate students to learn how to become librarians. And I taught classes and in library school, because we were one of the few library schools in the state of Florida. We had a lot of distant students. And actually, over time, there were very few on-site classes. Almost everything was taught online. Now, the problem with teaching online, because anybody who teaches at a university probably knows this, is that you get, there's a survey done by the students as to what they thought of you. And, you might not get good results. And it turns out that people that taught online got worse results than people that taught face-to-face. And that was because people that taught face-to-face, the students could come up, they could meet you, they could talk to you before class started, after class was over. there was this bonding that occurred between you and the instructor. So you were probably not going to give them a bad rating as much as if you never saw them or heard them. You were just words on a screen. And so I learned about that and I thought, oh, so I'm teaching online. I have to figure out a way to engage my students in such a way that they feel like I'm a real person. And one of the things I read was you should use audio. You should record audio so they hear your voice, and your voice is important. And I thought, oh, and so when I started looking into, and this was again in 2005, spring or summer, what's involved, and I suddenly discovered this thing called podcasting. And I'm like, okay, so it's people that have these eventually shows. It's new because, as I said, the hosting service I was using was real new. What can I do? And I said, George, so this is George G. Morgan. I said, George, nobody's doing podcasting for genealogy. I mean, one or two people had tried it or played with it, but didn't stick with it. So like did a couple episodes and then stopped. I said, why don't we do it? And that's what we did starting in September of 2005. Now, Dear Myrtle was also playing around with it about the same time. So we were certainly the earliest folks. And it was like we had to explain to people what a podcast was and the fact that it was free and the fact that it was just something you listened to. And as more people got mobile devices, more people got laptops, more people got smartphones and tablets, they could listen to us even in the car. They could just attach their smartphone to their car's audio system, listen to us while they commuted, and people could listen to us. And that was the other thing. This was a genealogy education that you didn't have to look at anything. You could just listen. So people listened to us while they exercised and while they did their household chores and you name it, and swam in their swimming pools and did whatever. And it became very popular. And in fact, this is not typical for a podcast, because a lot of people that start podcasting go, oh, when am I going to get sponsors? And the answer is, it's not immediate, because your sponsor wants you to have an audience. They're not going to sponsor you. And yet for us, it did not take too many months, partially because genealogy was a smaller chunk of the people out there. In other words, we were so focused on our listening group that genealogy companies sought us out as another way to advertise their products. So we even had, although one of the first ones was Roots Magic, which is still one of our sponsors, Ancestry even approached us at that time, because this was before Ancestry poured lots of money into television and things like that. So they sponsored us for a while. Find My Past sponsored us for a while. My Heritage has been a sponsor for us for many years now. We've had other sponsors come and go, but that has helped us get out there. And other podcasts have come along, people that are doing African American research, people doing Irish research, people that are doing more niche within the genealogy community. And again, some of there's Extreme Genes that is no longer podcasting, but a podcast for many years with a host who had done radio before that, so he knew what he was doing with audio. And so that's been the experience. It has grown, and I think it's continuing to grow. Again, people have time when they're stuck in their cars and they're commuting or on a flight, traveling across the country. So I think it'll still be around for a while. Although YouTube has, and a lot of people now take their podcasts and even put them up on a YouTube channel. Maybe something we'll do more of in the future, but that's just something that, again, some people do want to see you.
So when Mark Maron brags about 16 years going off the air with his podcast, he's got nothing on you then.
I was going to say, he's a latecomer. I have to share one more story about this. So a couple of years ago, I discovered that there was a local group that met in Tampa called the Florida Podcasters Association. And people drove to Tampa from both the West Coast, where St. Petersburg and Clearwater are. They even drove as far as from Orlando over. And they would meet once a month in the meeting room of the local IHOP. Yes, IHOP has a private room, believe it or not. And so you would go there in the evening once a month, and you would pay a small amount, like $10, and they would bring in a speaker, but they would also go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves. And there was usually like 40 people there or something. It was a big group, so decent sized group, and half the people were wanting to learn how to podcast. They had not podcast yet. The other half had been doing it. So they'd ask the people that had been doing it, how long? And people would say, I've been doing it for 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. And they'd get to me and George, and we would say, since 2005. And there'd be this sort of silence in the room for a while because they had not encountered people that have been podcasting as long. So George and I became basically the old men of podcasting, in many ways. And it was kind of funny when that happened, that people realized that, yeah, there were people that had been podcasting quite a while.
That's wild. Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you a question I ask all of my guests.
Okay.
If someone comes right up to you and really wants to get started in genealogy, they haven't done anything yet, nothing at all, they're blank slate, what's the best advice you want to give them?
Well, since 2 years ago, I'd probably said, I know this great book called Generation by Generation that some guy named Drew Smith wrote. And it is a very much a beginner's book and will take you through all the steps you need to know. Now, I would also probably tell them, why don't you join the local genealogy society, or at least go to one of their meetings and see if you like it. I would probably do that. I would probably, if they're on Facebook, I might encourage them to join a genealogy Facebook group like the Genealogy Squad. And the biggest thing is to tell the person, the main reason is to have fun. People won't stick with it unless it's fun, not work, but fun. And it is fun. But guess what? I also tell them, you will have more fun if you learn how to do it well. It's a little bit like being a gardener. I mean, anybody can stick a plant in the ground outside, but if you really want to have fun with it, you learn as much as you can about what's going to grow and what's not going to grow and where it's going to grow. Because once you have a lot more fun when you see a really nice garden that you've done. And genealogy is similar, is you will have the most fun if you do it right.
It was really an honor to be able to talk to Drew Smith today about his background in genealogy, his words of wisdom for those of us in the genealogy community, learning a lot about what he's done in the past to help people and guide them. I really hope you got a lot out of that. I know I particularly did, particularly the conversation we had regarding attracting younger people into our field. So I want to thank Drew Smith again for being on the podcast, and I want to thank you for listening to the OGS Ohio Roots Podcast. Curious about your family's Ohio past? The Ohio Genealogical Society is your gateway to uncovering generations of family history. Whether you're a seasoned researcher or just starting your journey, the OGS offers expert resources, local chapters, exclusive online records, online and in-person programs, and a passionate community ready to help you. Join today and bring your family story to life, because your family's history matters. Visit ogs.org to start your discoveries.
The Ohio Roots Podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Genealogical Society, the premier gateway for discovering your Ohio family history. Hosted by OGS Executive Director Noel Poyer and edited by Luke Poyer. Theme song is Beautiful Ohio, recorded by Bob Stanley and his orchestra in 1944. To learn more about joining the Ohio Genealogical Society, visit www.ogs.org.